May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. Amen. Amen. Well, the lectionary readings for the past few weeks are not going very easy on us, are they? It's understandable that we might start to feel just a wee bit defensive this week after Amos, the psalmist, Paul, and Luke have finished with us. Whew. The TV show Top Gear was playing in the background while I wrote this, and at one point Jeremy Clarkson said, while doing something very irresponsible in a very fancy Jaguar, that given the expansive space, God must be his feet, but in this car, he was going to thrash God in a race. If that's not something I can work with, I don't know what is. Now, my aim is not to be the seminarian who stands in front of you and talks on and on about the minutiae of biblical authorship and historical context. But I ask your forgiveness in advance, because I'm going to just a little. I'd like to walk through some things in today's readings that jumped out at me, beginning with Amos. As you get to know me, you will learn that I spend a lot of my time in the Old Testament. And if you give me a chance, I will ramble on until your eyes glaze over. I promise to stop before that happens. This passage reads like a pretty straightforward condemnation of the wealthy. Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory, drink wine from bowls, and anoint themselves in oil. Woe to those in Jerusalem who feel secure in their comfort while destruction draws ever closer. But then we get to the last part of verse 6, and now he adds something new. He gets more specific about who he is speaking of. Not the wealthy because they are wealthy, but because they are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. While Amos levels his accusations at everyone, absolutely everyone, Joseph's name here is a shorthand way of speaking to the Israelites. We don't know a lot about Amos and his life in the mid-8th century BCE, but we do know this. He could not stand the corruption, the injustice, the mistreatment of the poor that he saw around him. He denounced the idolatry he saw both pagans and Hebrews practicing. He foretold the destruction of Judah and Israel, and also foretold the Israelite people being exiled from their lands. He saw this coming crisis as an urgent warning for the people to reorient themselves to the way of God, to turn away from the notion that wealth would keep them safe from harm, or that security could come from anywhere else but the Lord. Amos said, in no uncertain terms, and again sparing no one, that God would protect those who were righteous in God's eyes, who followed God's command to act with justice and mercy, and not those who deemed themselves righteous by virtue of wealth and security. I think Amos would have always used his turn signal. Amos desperately wanted people to turn towards God and away from the injustice he saw all around him, to turn towards the responsibility towards one another and proper worship of the Lord. After Amos, the psalmist comes for us. Do not put your trust in princes, in mortals, in whom there is no help. When their breath departs, they return to the earth, and on that very day their plans perish. He seems like he would be fun at parties. We all love to be reminded of our own mortality and how fleeting our accomplishments and legacies really are. The psalmist is only naming the truth, though. Even the mightiest of kings, the most powerful of leaders, the brightest of stars, and our heroes, they will die, just as we will. But the psalmist keeps going, reorienting us once again to God. Happy are they whose help is in the Lord, who execute justice for the oppressed, who give food to the hungry. The Lord, the psalmist says, loves the righteous. There's that word again. This psalm was likely written after the Babylonian exile, when the Jewish people were allowed to return to Jerusalem to start rebuilding the temple. There must have been a time of celebration and mourning, relief and uncertainty, in a time of very real disorientation. This psalm is a reminder of what? Of who to hold on to. Hold on to the God who sets prisoners free and who reigns forever. Put not your trust in the world and its powers, for stability and safety will not be found there. We then arrive at 1 Timothy, and I admit this is a letter I sometimes have trouble approaching with an open heart, but not today. The author warns us of the difference between love of God and love of money, and encourages us to shun all this, pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. He says directly that the danger of wealth is to trust in it, as fickle as it is. We're again told what righteousness means to God, and it is again not what we can collect or the security that comes when we try to hold on to it. For God will richly provide for us. And trusting that God will richly provide for us is one of the hardest parts of the day-to-day life of faith. This letter was probably written in the mid-1st century, when the theology and teachings of the church were new and not solidly established. Even the word Christian was new, and the emerging faith was still figuring out its place within the larger society. The church in Ephesus was facing conflicting teachings, and the author is trying to define what church leadership and church doctrine should look like. It wasn't uncommon for people of the time to return to their previous religious traditions amidst the confusion, and it must have been disorienting and sometimes disheartening for those called to follow Jesus, trying to find a stable path to follow. 1 Timothy again urges a reorientation towards God's righteousness. Luke then brings us to the most visceral exploration of the lesson in this set of readings, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Poor Lazarus is hungry, suffering, and covered with sores, and he dies. The rich man, not protected from mortality by his wealth, also dies. In the conversation that the rich man and Abraham have across the chasm between them, the rich man asks Lazarus to be sent, not asked, sent, to soothe him. Upon refusal, he asks Abraham to send Lazarus to warn his family of the fate awaiting them. Abraham answers, and I always imagine a bit sharply, they have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them. And that line hits me in the stomach every time. This is the risk of clinging to wealth, to the illusion of self-made righteousness. Not Hades, or not only Hades, but the loss of the ability to see what justice even is. He did not care for the vulnerable at his own gate in life, and in death is only capable of seeing Lazarus as a tool to be used, a servant to be commanded, and not as a person beloved by God. This is ultimately where the belief that we can thrash God in any kind of way gets us. The rich man did not place his faith in the Lord's power, but in his own. He has, not through the existence of his wealth, but because of his faith in his wealth, lost sight of God. This passage differs from the others in that no way out is offered to the rich man. Jesus is issuing a warning about the result of improper stewardship, right on the heels of last week with the parable of the dishonest manager. Reverend Lisa taught us last week that the best use of money is the building of relationships and the building of community. And today's readings follow that idea by teaching us that our relationships and communities need to be oriented and reoriented toward God. Each of the 4 readings today illustrates for us the difference between the kind of righteousness that gets us into trouble, the illusory kind that relies on our own resources, our own strength, our own intelligence, our own wealth, and our own individualism, the kind that all too often harms the most vulnerable, versus the kind of righteousness that God intends for us. It is very easy for us to grab onto what we can see, what we can spend, what we can wrap around us. Those things that make us feel physically safe from the elements, from that creaky noise outside, from scary people, and from uncertainty. It is in our nature to seek safety with where we can in times of turmoil, and goodness knows turmoil is the standard condition of human history. I think all of us can feel that in the world around us right now. I can feel in myself the urge to make sure I am as protected and secure as I can be, and that maybe buying yet another soft, fuzzy throw blanket will make everything better. And maybe some of you are feeling that way as well. It is very, very human. But in these difficult readings, I find there is a line connecting them to one another, a line of hope. For what would the warning of prophets be if there wasn't time to change our ways? What future could exist for people in exile if the dictates of princes lasted forever? There is a way we can take hold of a life that is really life. a time when very little of the world around us feels stable, much less safe, we have a roadmap. Not only a roadmap, but a God who will remind us and reorient us with endless patience. As many times as we can lose sight of what righteousness means in God's eyes, and we focus instead on the security and status that material success brings us, God will call us back. As often as we may try to outrace God, holding on to our idea of our own power, like a young person who doesn't want to share her toys, God's at our window, tapping to get our attention. We might as well turn around and return to our loving home. Amen.